Well, I hope it lives up to your expectations. I guess I will get started. Cool. So, who am I? I've been programming in the games industry for a bit over 5 years now. And I started off as an audio programmer, about 2.5 of those. Since then, I kind of moved around, done a few different roles. So engine, graphics, and I'm still doing graphics, but like GPU, SDK side, like PlayStation. And in terms of my audio programming experience, as all, this is an audio programming conference. That was all at Frontier. I've done kind of a mix of stuff from like sound propagation, dialogue systems, tooling, gameplay, working with Wires SDK, HO, and also contributed to a game audio chapter in a book. Kind of the reason I'm giving this talk is I didn't come from like a typical background for a programmer. As probably quite a few of you in this chat, I did like a sound design, audio engineering degree. And some way through that, I decided I didn't really want to get into one of those roles. And I found out about audio programming. I'd done a little bit of programming before, not really that much, and forgotten most of it. And funnily enough, I told myself I never wanted to be a programmer. When I was younger, I did some web programming, I think, like databases. I was like, oh, I hate this. Never want to do this. And look at me now. I'm doing it. But I think that was about the outcome. If you're programming something you're interested in, that makes it fun. And so when I decided I wanted to get into this, I was had a lot of self-doubt. Didn't really think that it was a path I could take with my education. Because if you look at any job spec, they have something like this: degree in CS or maths or strong math skills, things that I didn't really have. So I was like, well, I'd love to do this, but I can't see myself getting into it. I'll probably just have to do another degree. So what does this talk cover? So it's a bit about how I got there, how I taught myself what I needed to do to get a job and to continue improving. It's not really a step-by-step on how to become an audio programmer. I'm kind of high-level lessons and advice from what I think worked for me. And as this is an audio talk, it is obviously aimed at people who want to get into game audio programming, but only loosely, really. I think a lot of the advice is applicable to self-teaching programming or anything, really. And I'm going to give some additional thoughts, that some lessons I've learned from working in the industry that I wish someone would have told me when I started. Okay, practical advice. So I think to start with, it's a good idea to have some kind of goal or passion, so that you're not completely aimless. So there's various areas of game audio programming. There's like gameplay side, where you're sort of working with sound designers, hooking things up, helping the audio come to life. There's the lower level engine systems where you're doing like sound propagation or working on performance, or like Wise plugins, doing tools. So build pipelines or dialogue tools, or like Reaper integrations. Or there's, I guess it's not really game audio programming, but like the DAW plugin software side. So I think it's a good idea to kind of loosely work out what area you enjoy, because that's going to help you work out what you need to learn and give you a bit of direction, so you're just not completely lost. I think what helped me especially, and if you can have an even smaller goal, like a niche, something that you really resonate with, that you find a lot of passion in. I think that's really helpful for a few reasons. One, it gives you like a cool endpoint. You could think of this really interesting project you'd love to make one day. Even if it's far-fetched, it's going to even more inform your learning. And also it's going to come across when you talk to people and when you're interviewing, and that will help to set you apart from other people And people like hearing passionate people talk about things, and they'll see you light up. So for me, that was sound propagation. So actually, these two talks are what inspired me to get into game audio programming. So one is about the sound of Grand Theft Auto 5, which I highly recommend watching. And likewise, the other one about audio technology in The Last of Us. So these kind of opened my eyes to, what is game audio programming? This is really cool. You can, what sound propagation is, and how interesting that tech is, and how it crossed over with sound design. And I was like, oh yeah, I'd love to do that one day. And as an ending to that story, a few years later, I managed to do that. So I worked on Elite Dangerous and ended up writing the sound propagation system, which is, if you told me that when I started looking into this stuff, I think you were lying. I didn't think I'd ever be able to get there. So yeah, and that tech was partially inspired by the Naughty Dog talk. Cool. So next, getting started with programming. Although, yeah, it's great to have like a far-fetched idea of what you'd love to do. It's really good to focus on building a strong foundation first and not getting ahead of yourself. And I think that especially it's good to start really with the basics. I know there's a lot of these courses, like, learn game programming with Unreal and Unity and build your first game in a day or whatever. And these are great, and there's nothing wrong with Unreal or Unity or learning this stuff. But if you dive straight into something like that, you're going to be quite overwhelmed. You're going to end up learning a mixture of the fundamentals like C++ and game maths and things with Unreal. And that's just adding to everything you need to take in. And additionally, like, I think having a really solid foundation is just so important, because even though, so many game studios are using Wise or Unreal, if you understand what's going on below these things, when something goes wrong in these tools, which they do all the time, you're gonna have a better idea of how to debug that and what's going on, or if you want to extend them, or especially how to making best use of them, knowing what the trade-offs are and what certain things do. So for me, I started with some just Googled what are the best C++ programming books and started going through exercises there until I started to build up my skills enough that I could I wasn't constantly having to look up syntax and this kind of thing. In terms of game audio programming as well, there's not really a lot of resources about it online. There's definitely some, and I've got an appendix in this talk actually that I've linked various things that I used. I think one of the reasons is really game audio programming is just a mix of general gameplay engine and tools programming, but you have a speciality in audio. So you're doing audio specific things and using your audio specific knowledge for that. So really getting a good grounding in just general game programming is going to really help you and be what you want. So yeah, that's C++ fundamentals, pointers, 3D maths. Another thing I wanted to touch on with maths, a lot of people struggle with it or don't think it's for them. Really, the maths you need for the majority of games programming isn't that complicated, and you don't need to memorize all of the formulas and how to derive everything like you would for a test at school. The most important thing is building an intuitive understanding of how just the core 3D maths concepts work, so that when you're presented with a problem, you know what tools to use. You don't have to derive everything. You just need to think about how to solve that. And again, I've linked some resources for that later. And yeah, debugging, another huge one, and just general game engine concepts. Cool. So say you've started to, you can do some programming. You don't have to look up syntax all the time. Really, just doing projects is the number one thing. you need to do to really build your skills. Not only is it going to build your skills, it's going to help to build a portfolio for you. So especially if you're self-taught, having something on GitHub to show that you can program and you've got the skills, that's hugely important. It's also something you can talk about in interviews. And if you can talk about your thought process and how you went about solving problems, that's just one of the biggest things you can have. And it keeps things fun. Instead of just going through a dry programming textbook, you're making interesting things. So what should you make? Well, if you can, think of something that you want to make, like a problem you want to solve, something that would be interesting for you, or just, something cool and fun. So like, for example, I, a while ago wrote a Wise Reaper integration when the Wise authoring API was first released. Because, I was a sound designer before this, and I still love audio and messing around with sound. And when that came out, I was like, oh yeah, I'm spending all this time importing sounds from Reaper into Wise, and they've released this thing that allows you to script it. What if I made something that could automate that? So that's something I wanted to use myself, and that just gives you so much more motivation for actually building it, instead of just some kind of project that you're just doing, like a school project you've been told to do. Is actually something that's interesting to you, and that passion will come across when you talk about it as well. I also messed around with Wise plugins. Like, I loved granular synthesis. I wrote like a little simple Wise granular plugin, and then I was like, oh yeah, I can integrate that in Unreal, make a little game, and have an RTPC slider for the grains. And suddenly, once all that's working, you just get this, burst of inspiration. Like, oh, this is so cool. So yeah, that's, thinking of stuff that you want to make that you find interesting, I think is key. So what are some examples of things you could do if you're interested in these different areas? So if you're interested in the gameplay side of things, looking at ways to dynamically drive audio, like physics systems or Foley systems that are taking game data and transforming that in a way that sound designers might use, basically driving RTBCs and Wise, or sound propagation systems. If you're interested in the lower level stuff, like building a Wise plugin, building a simple audio engine, not recreating Wise, but something that just loads some WAV files, plays them back, maybe pans them, this kind of thing. If you're interested in the tool side of things, Reaper scripts, UE4 editor utilities, and Juice is a great framework if you're interested in building VST plugins and things. So I'm not going to talk too much about like the intricacies of building projects, but I think one hugely important skill as a programmer is breaking down large tasks. When you get into the industry, you're going to be given a, hey, implement this big thing or implement this. And to start with, it's going to seem quite overwhelming. Like, that might be 2 months of work. So how do you even go about breaking that down into sizable chunks? So I'm just going to give like a small example of how I might do that, if that kind of gives a bit of my thought process over. So say I wanted to build like a simple Wise delay plugin. First thing I do is just go read all the documentation, just so I'm kind of getting my brain in that zone and I've got a high level understanding of what are the things that are involved in this. Always very helpful. Hopefully there is documentation. For this there is. In the real world, not always. Then I'd find like a sample project or something and download and compile that, get that working. Because there's usually like a lot of build systems and plumbing around this, that if you can just download something that's already working to get you started, then that's great. I would check that a sample project actually shows up in Wise, the plugin. Things like this. There's always like weird issues with mismatched like debug or release builds or these kind of things. huge step, make sure the debugger works. Debugger is one of your most important assets. And I think from the get-go, getting really familiar with it and learning how to use it is going to aid you so much. And it's not only for fixing bugs, but it's also for understanding code. Another thing I'd recommend is, just like this, downloading a Wise plugin, downloading just open source projects. There's open source sound engines out there and things, and just pausing in a debugger and stepping through and seeing what's going on. It really gives you an understanding of what the flow is of things. And then I'd start with like a really simple effect, something that just reduces the gain, doesn't even have an RTPC attached to it. Just to make sure I worked out, okay, how do I even process audio, and can I get that running, and let's not blow up my speakers. That's happened quite a few times. Make sure to turn your sound down when you're writing DSP code if you like your ears or wear earplugs. And then I'd attach a parameter to the gain. So I work out, okay, how do I get something to show up in the authoring tool, and how do I get that to like plug in through to the plugin. Then I'd implement like a really simple delay, like just one single tap. And then I'd iteratively add and test more features. So the thing I kind of wanted to get across here is you should break things down into steps that are testable and that can give you like little checkpoints. So say you went from step 1 to step 8 and it doesn't work. You've got so much code to debug. You just have no idea where to even begin. And I think this is one of the things when people start programming that you can get overwhelmed with, right? My code doesn't work. Like, how do I even debug it? What's going on? And if you just break down the steps into things that there's not much that can go wrong there, right? You haven't changed very much. It's much easier to digest and to work out and debug that. Cool. So for me, I think this is my next piece of advice. This is probably the most important thing that's helped me throughout my career, and that's just being curious. So being curious, what I mean by that. So just being interested and always wanting to delve deeper into what's actually going on. Say you've built this Wise plugin or whatever. You want to start to understand all the nuts and bolts. You want to understand everything from, okay, well, how does the audio even like get out my speakers? Like, how does it go through the audio API and the intricacies of delays and all these things? And it can be quite overwhelming. And I don't mean you have to learn everything, but if you have this thought process, it's going to like continue to help you to learn more, and you're never going to be satisfied, but your knowledge is going to continue to grow. And especially with a field like this, where I think it's not as well documented as something like graphics or gameplay programming, seeking out resources and trying to learn more and more is always going to be really helpful. And I kind of wanted to give some practical advice some tangible advice about how I kind of take that curiosity into something that I can give you apart from just saying, be curious. So what I used to do is would just continually find resources and Google things, be on this kind of constant search to learn more. And so I started like a Google Doc where I had categorized lots of different resources, like loosely like what I've put here, but there's probably more than that. And most of these I had no idea what most of them even meant when I started. I couldn't really understand this stuff. Sorry. But it helped to build kind of like a spider web of resources. And I'd go back to these as I learned more and start to gain more information from them. And the other thing I did is like treat each resource as a branching off point. So say you have an article and it mentions some technical concept that you know nothing about or haven't even heard of, then I would just Google that and start looking into it. And suddenly you've you're like researching into something that you never even knew existed. And especially being self-taught, right? You're not given a syllabus of these are the things that you need to learn. And it's a great way to start to expose yourself to things that you didn't even know existed in the first place. And yeah, and I think it's also important, not to overwhelm yourself and make sure that the things you're looking at are things that you can digest. If something's too complicated, there's too much maths or something like this, then maybe leave it to the side. But there's so much out there about programming and games programming that there's usually multiple resources, some that are easier to understand or more that connect with you more. And yeah, learning to Google effectively, I think that's something that that everyone should spend a bit of time on. It will really help you. Cool. And yeah, a bit about on self-learning. So I think self-teaching really works for a lot of people. Like it really works for me. I didn't get along great in school. I didn't really enjoy things that I didn't think were useful, which isn't a great thing. But when a teacher would be like, "Oh, you just got to learn this thing for a test," and it wasn't a subject that I enjoyed, it's like, yeah, I don't like this. And that was even when I learned about matrices in maths. So for those of you who don't know, matrices are like the backbone of so much stuff in games and in computing and in machine learning. In games, for example, they're used to represent the positions and rotations of everything in the world. And I remember learning about it in school, and the teacher was just like, here are these two grids of numbers that you multiply together in this weird way. Just learn it so you can do it on the test. I thought, oh, this is pointless. When am I ever going to need this? And I was very wrong about that. But yeah, with self-learning, you don't know what you don't know. So I think that's why the previous technique worked so well for me. Just being aware of things is already a huge step. You don't need to know everything, but knowing something exists is quite powerful. Also understanding how you learn best. Some people like having the structure of a course, and there's plenty of great programming courses out there, and maths. MIT has some great courses, Khan Academy, and these kinds of things. For me, I like to learn at my own pace, so I actually quite like a good book where I can kind of skip through if I know some things already. And the other thing is, if you don't enjoy or aren't connecting with something, then just find another resource. You're not stuck in a class in school where you have to use what's given to you, which is something I really love about teaching myself. And yeah, imposter syndrome. So this is one that I kind of always struggled with until I learned to embrace it, I think. So learning programming, especially if you want to transition into it completely and you haven't got any background in it, is quite overwhelming. There's a lot to learn. And it can seem a bit daunting. When I started and I'm just struggling with learning C++, and then you look at these talks doing these huge, complicated sound propagation systems or whatever, you're like, okay, how am I ever going to get to that point? And, that imposter syndrome didn't stop even when I got a job and, even when I moved through my career. But I think that's a good thing. I think if you embrace it and you realize that if you have that, it just means that you're always striving to learn more. And that can only be good. And also never be embarrassed to ask for help, even if you have stupid questions. People are always happy to help. And it's better to ask than to try and do something, try and program something, commit it and, break the build or, it's much better to just be open and be vulnerable. Another big thing I'd say, which I guess everyone's doing a bit here, is be part of the community. So yeah, when I was self-learning, it was quite isolating because I'm just in my room studying programming textbooks, not talking to anybody. And I think it's really, really important to connect both with your peers, people who are also learning, and people in the industry. That's going to help to keep you motivated. And you're going to learn things both from your peers and from people in the industry. For me, I was part of a game audio programming Slack group, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. But that was one of the single most important things in my career, I think, because I was able to connect with people in the industry before I got a job, ask them questions about how things work or just stupid programming questions. And I would say, most people in the industry are really friendly. If you see an interesting talk by somebody and you just want to give them a ping, ask them something about it, more often than not, they will get back to you and they'll be really happy to share. Yeah, so I also wanted to share a few pieces of advice that I wish someone had told me when I started working in the industry from things that I have learned. So first thing is is a mindset. When you're learning programming, especially when you're self-learning and you're coming across lots of different resources, there's often some that are quite dogmatic or push you into a specific kind of programming, solving problems in a specific way or using specific language features or this kind of thing. And in some cases this can get quite toxic. Think like the Reaper versus Pro Tools discourse. I think that's quite funny, but yeah. And the thing that I wish someone told me is there's no right way to do anything. You can listen to someone who has a lot of experience and has worked on loads of cool games, and they're going to tell you to do it one way, and then someone else tells you to do it another way. And when I learned to embrace that, okay, there's just no one right way. As you learn more and as you experience more, you'll start to see the trade-offs and benefits of different things, and learn your own style. And I think it's just important to be open and to be curious and to also, ask why people are doing things in a certain way. It may be from experience or they may have been taught someone else. But yeah, this really opened me up, and I feel like I improved a lot when I just learned to embrace the different styles and to understand that different people are going to have programming wildly different ways, and also not to be precious over your code. At the end of the day, yes, your job is a programmer, but it's a job. Your job is to solve problems, and it doesn't matter. It does matter what the code looks like, in terms of maintaining it, but you don't need to be clever. There's times in my career where I thought I needed to show that through my code that, I knew what I was doing and that I did things in a really clever way. But that doesn't matter as long as you get to the end result. It's better to do things in a simple way, and to not overcomplicate things. Also, soft skills. I think one of the most, the best thing about being an audio programmer is you understand sound design as language. Because, like I said, most audio programming roles in games are just gameplay / engine / tools with a specialization in audio. And in some ways, your job is being the client of a sound designer. You're there to help them achieve the best vision of the audio in the game. And if you start from sound design, then you can talk their language and you can understand what they're going for and have a discussion with them. So if you've got those soft skills to be able to really connect with them and build something great together, that's going to make you someone that people really want to work with, and you're going to make some amazing stuff. There's kind of two lessons that I feel that I learned that are quite important. And one is it's not all about programming. So yes, your job is a programmer, but oftentimes you can solve problems by just talking to people. or in multiple different ways. And it's always good to think that way. One example of this is the second point. Like I've often, when I was working, I'd have like a sound designer come to me with a solution. So maybe they saw a talk, or they had an idea, or they wrote a blueprint, and they're like, okay, I want you to implement this. But I'd always take a step back and think, okay, well, what's actually the problem that you have first? Because there's been times where actually the problem is just something in gameplay, where the gameplay is a little bit off, or it's doing too much, and that's causing some issues with the sound. And we ended up just talking to the gameplay team and discussing how to redesign some things. And yeah, when you embrace that, not only are you going to have to do less work potentially, you're going to end up solving problems in a better way. The other thing that I really wanted to highlight is being T-shaped. So some of you might have heard of this. It's when you have like a specialization, but also you have like a wide knowledge base of a kind of like a low-level knowledge base of lots of different things. And I think this is really important for audio programming, because you're collaborating with a lot of different teams, with the gameplay teams, with design, obviously sound designers. And the more you can communicate with those people, the more you're going to create better things, right? And also, if you learn about other disciplines, it's going to help you generate interesting ideas that you might not have thought about had you not have researched those things, or had you just stuck in your box. I'll have an example of that next slide. For anyone who's interested in that side of things, the sort of game audio programming, I'd really recommend this book, Game Engine Architecture by Jason Gregory. So this kind of goes through basically how a game engine works, what all the different parts to it are. It gives you some solid fundamental knowledge and areas to look at in terms of working on a game engine. And it'll help you just understand how these things are structured, which is just also great knowledge that will help you getting an entry-level position and working in the industry. And so, yeah, here's an example of that. So when I was working on this sound propagation system, it was like a room portal-based system. So for people who aren't aware of that, you basically have rooms, which are just some geometry that the player can be in that marks up the world. And you have portals, which are doors or windows where sound might emanate through. And then you look at which rooms the sound objects are in and which room the listener is in, and look at the paths that would go through these portals. And you might be able to adjust, say, if the door's closed, to muffle the sound more. And we also had like a raycast-based obstruction system. So that would be if you had objects in the room that would obstruct the sound, then it would use raycasts to work out how obstructed the sound is. So we'd have both occlusion and obstruction. And one of the issues we had was that we only fired so many arrays per frame, but we had too many audio objects to update every audio object completely every frame. So we'd have to budget this. And we'd have to prioritize them, because say you had an audio object that went in front of some geometry, you want that to have a very fast response rate, right? Otherwise it's going to go behind it, and then the sound muffles very slowly and it doesn't sound very good. So I spent some time working out, okay, what kind of heuristics could I use to judge what audio objects to update. And I tried some things, but it just never really was quite enough. And then one of the techniques that I read about in that book actually is portal culling. So in graphics, people have used this technique. They have a similar like room portal structure, and then they use the portals to work out what objects you can see through the portals. So if it's occluded by a wall, they won't render it. So I thought, oh, well, if an audio object is occluded by a wall, we don't need to fire those raycasts because we already know about it from the occlusion system, and it's much cheaper to test that. So I wrote something to work out which audio objects were behind walls, and you couldn't see them through a portal. And then I just vastly reduced their priority, which basically solved the problem. And I wouldn't have thought of that if I hadn't started reading up about different areas in game programming. So yeah, that's a little concrete example. And yeah, now it's time for questions, because when I ran through this talk, I think I talked slower and went a bit longer, but I'm hoping people found that interesting, and I'm happy to answer. Of course, you said, John. Happy to answer just any questions about anything related audio programming or anything like that. And yeah, there'll be an appendix after this with lots of links that I found useful. And thank you, Damien, for linking that. Okay, Sam, super interesting. How did you find jumping into C++? Or did you have fundamentals from other languages? So I had some basic fundamentals of programming in terms of like control flow, so like, you know, if statements, while loops, for loops, these kind of things. So I knew some of that, which is helpful. But yeah, but still jumping into C++ was quite a challenge. I'd only done, I think, some Python programming before, and it's just a lot of concepts in C++ that take a while to get your head around, like, yeah, pointers and just like constructors and just how everything's built in the language. So it took me a while. It was still quite challenging. Definitely, if you haven't done the programming, learning something like Python first might be a good step. The basics are transferable from any language. Like, yeah, once you've learnt one, it's much easier to learn other ones. And so if you start with something like Python, you're gonna not have such a hard of a time. But if you want to start with C++, I think there's no issues with that. Greg, how long did it take you where you felt like you had built up good fundamentals? Can't quite remember. I think like fundamentals enough with C++ to start writing my own things. I'd say a few months. Fundamentals in terms of game programming, I mean, I feel like that took me some time even after I got a job. I think, you know, you don't really need to be completely solid with that to get in. It's just being aware of all the concepts. But yeah, it took me at least, you know, just to get to grips with C++, at least a few months. And by say to grips, I mean, you know, enough to write some simple stuff. If anyone says they're an expert in C++, they're lying to you. It's a very complicated language. There are so many games that have tried to solve similar issues. Did you ever try to speak with programmers from other companies to get their insights? Yeah, I mean, it was a while ago when I did this, and I definitely did speak to other people in the industry and look at a lot of talks and research papers and things. I know, yeah, I mean, it's a heavy topic that a lot of people have tried to solve in many different ways, and I think a lot of it is game specific as well. I think the best solutions are ones that take advantage of the game design or systems that are already in the game. I think you know, like a sound propagation system for like top-down shooter versus an open world game versus like an on-rails linear inside game, you're probably going to want to have different things. But yeah, I certainly did talk to people, but I can't quite remember all of that. Looking forward to those links. Is there a specific area you're looking to add more documentation to? I mean, I'm going to just link resources that I found. I mean, I think it would be good to have. My chat skipping. When I was like writing this, other areas like game development, there's a lot of sort of collated notes of lots of different talks and things. I don't think there's much of that for game audio programming. So maybe having something like that on Airwiggles would be quite useful. Would you recommend using tools like ChatGPT to understand concepts, the foundation of audio programming? To be honest, I haven't used it too much, so I don't want to give too much advice on that. But certainly, give it a go and see what it comes out with. Just make sure to validate that it's giving you useful advice. But certainly, I imagine it could be helpful. I mean, it wasn't a thing when I was learning. Would you recommend C++ over C#? I do think C# has less rough edges in some ways. There's less things you need to think about. If you get to grips with C++ properly, you'll understand more of what goes on underneath. School of Video Game Audio. Lua could be a good starting language too. Yeah, I agree with that. Because Lua is a scripting engine that a lot of games do use. I think just start with something, and this is also why, like, if you have a goal, if you want to do tools, maybe C# or Python are going to be more than likely. If you really want to be a game audio programmer at a AAA company, you're going to have to learn C++ at some point. It just depends what you want to get out of it. If you just want to learn a bit of programming as a sound designer but don't want to transition careers, I probably wouldn't recommend learning C++. I would learn something like C# or Python. Do you feel like audio programmers sit within the audio team structure, or are they more aligned to gameplay and systems? In my experience, they sit more within the audio team. I think that's where they should sit. I think they should be like mixed with both, right? Because as I said, they're in a unique position to really communicate and work closely with the sound designers. But from a programming point of view, they want to kind of take the work that they're doing and take the audio team's needs and make sure those are represented in the engine team and the gameplay team. So I think the ideal audio programmer would be sort of half and half. They're connected with both teams. What are your views on tools like Meta Sounds, giving you more control of sound designers? How do you see the role of audio programmers changing in years to come? I mean, I'm personally all for tools like Meta Sounds that give sound designers control, where I think there's areas where like writing code makes more sense. Like, I don't think writing a sound propagation system in Blueprints is probably the best idea. But if you want to hooking sounds up and making sounds more dynamic and making sounds that are driven by gameplay and react in different ways, I think that's stuff that should be offloaded to sound designers or more technical sound designers. So I think tools that bridge that gap and reduce the burden on the programming team are really helpful. There are obviously downsides to this stuff. A lot of these tools, Blueprints or whatever, have performance implications, and you can get yourself tied in knots with less technical people writing code, for sure. But I think with education and with guidelines, then these can be really useful and just help make better games more quickly, which is good. Where would you say is a good place to start learning C++, knowing other programming languages like C# and Python? there's a book I read which I've linked, called Accelerated C++. And I think that's quite good because it's a book that assumes you have some programming knowledge already. So it skips over the basics of programming. Other than that, that's just my personal experience. But yeah, there's probably more resources like that because it's a common thing. People wanting to jump into C++ that already have some programming knowledge. But yeah, from personal experience, I can recommend Accelerated C++, that book. Yeah. Anything I've missed? I get quite hung up whenever my studies lead me to do some DSP math. Does anyone recommend any courses for the subject? CCRMA, I think it's Stanford, is great. That's quite a renowned one. I'm not a DSP expert, just to mention that. There's a few, I think the Will Perkle books and stuff. There's some slightly easier or slightly more approachable ones for writing VST plugins and the DSP for that. But yeah, CCRMA and MIT have some good resources. Some other ones I'll try and dig up that I've used. But yeah. Is there any area you would recommend as a starting way into the industry? I'm assuming things like tools are quite good bang for your buck. That's a prime value that being insanely complicated. Oh yeah, DSP Guide, that's a great one. Yeah. By starting way into the industry, what do you mean by that? Do you mean what's easiest to get a job? Is that kind of what you're asking? Where would you say that the line typically is between a task that's handled by an audio programmer and a task handled by a technical sound designer? I'll get back to your question in a sec. It depends on the company and the tool set as well. Because if you are using Unreal or something with heavy visual scripting or scripting like Lua or something like that, then a technical sound designer would have more control over what they can do. But if you're working on something where a sound designer can't even hook up their own events, then audio programmers are going to have to, that's the kind of the line that of this sort of sliding scale from hooking a sound up to doing engine stuff is going to slide more that way. I think ideally, say if you're using Unreal or something, then it's going to be the technical sound designer is going to be working in blueprints, doing somewhat, taking game data and manipulating that. So there'll be less of that sort of gameplay side audio programming for an audio programmer. I think that's the main thing, really. It's how much the gameplay side of stuff falls onto the audio programmer, and that depends on what the tool set of the company is. That would be my answer to that. First junior job. I don't know, really. I wouldn't worry about really thinking in that way. I think I wouldn't think in the way of learning something that's the best way to get a job. I guess that sounds kind of silly, but there's more. I'd say there's more sort of the gameplay audio programming side of stuff. I think there's a lot of roles for that. So I think if you can get a good solid grounding in that, that's not a bad idea. Have a look at what jobs are up at the moment. I'm not working in game audio at the moment, but have a look around, see what the kind of what's come up in the last year. But just do what you enjoy and do what interests you, as would be my advice. And don't worry too much about catering that specifically to get your first job. Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. the Will Perkle book. Yeah, it's good practical, but yes. Thanks for all the links in the chat, everyone, by the way. I really appreciate that. All right, anything else or anything I missed? Okay. I missed the start of the talks. Apologies if you already covered this. Would you recommend Unity or Unreal for a newbie to learn, e.g. making a simple game to understand the whole process better? I guess it's quite a common question. I don't really have a strong opinion. I mean, if you want to get into, it depends on what your goal is, I think. If you want to get into AAA audio programming, a lot of companies are using Unreal, and Unreal's in C++, so that covers two of those. If you're a sound designer that wants to dabble a bit in it, Unity is probably going to be more friendly, I would say, in terms of just getting up and running and having less sharp edges. That's my advice. I think I don't have a huge amount of experience otherwise, but yeah, that's what I would say. Just focusing purely on sound design at the moment. Got a basic fundamental understanding of middleware. Do you recommend coupling both paths or just getting very good at one? I appreciate audio implementation, but I still have ways to go on my sound design. If you're discounting audio programming completely, yeah, I mean, I'm probably not the best person to ask, but I'd say if you're looking to be a sound designer, I mean, I'm sure there's many sound designers in the room that can answer, but yeah, I think both are probably quite important. And it just depends on how technical you want to get. Obviously, there are technical sound designer roles who take, I guess, the wires and implementation side of it even further, or that's a speciality. Yeah, but I mean, in general, just, obviously be mindful of what you need to do, what skills are required to get a job, and what skills are useful, but also just do what interests you and what you find most motivating. If you really love working in middleware, then keep doing that and get great at it. I think there's definitely a lot to be said for being a generalist, but having like a really good specialization in something, especially in like a really saturated field, can set you apart. But yeah. Give it a few more minutes if anyone has more questions. Oh, you're welcome. Yes, I'm going to forward the slides to Lewis, and so I think he should be able to attach it on Airwiggles, and it will have the appendix there. Yeah. Are things like TDD used, by the way? If anyone doesn't know what TDD is, it's test-driven development. At least I hope that's what you're referring to. In games, not as much. I mean, the thing is, games change so rapidly, especially on the gameplay side, that you can't really. you end up spending more time maintaining those tests, and it's really hard to write a test for that kind of thing. Certainly, there are parts of games, especially like the engine layer, or maybe certain audio systems that are more testable, and you know, where it makes sense, I think tests are useful, especially if you're also getting performance metrics and things out of them. But I haven't really seen test-driven development itself used anywhere I've worked. And I don't think it's as much of a thing in the games industry. I'm sure there's some places that use it a bit. And I haven't worked in like a kind of, I guess, like a business programming job and really experienced it. But yeah, it's not really something that's widely used. There's certainly some tests for some things. Usually they're quite sparing in my experience. But yeah, I mean, often more you'll see like as well, like running a frame and taking a profile and then having that like in a graph somewhere, or yeah, like tests for low level engine things. But yeah, TDD not really as much of a thing. And I don't think I explained what TDD was. I actually don't really know it in that much detail, but it's basically yeah, writing tests as a way to as you're programming, as kind of a way to build up the code, essentially. All right, well, unless there's anything else, I hope people found that a little bit helpful. There's some insights that people could take from that. Appreciate it wasn't a step-by-step guide for, I'll answer this as well, for audio programming, but yeah, I hope it was helpful, and my experience kind of resonated with some people. Do you have any experience of programming audio engines for pure hardware? Any resources for that? I don't have any experience. It's actually something I'd like to do. But yeah, I guess you want to look into like embedded systems and like audio for real-time systems and real-time OS. I think there was like a board called Bela, I think. I don't know if it still exists. That was like a programmable thing, but no, I don't have any offhand. But yeah, like I guess real-time audio, real-time operating systems, embedded systems, that area of looking for resources. But yeah, I don't have any specific experience to lend you there. All right. They are still a thing. That's cool. Yeah, I think I saw some at a conference at one point. They look really cool. Bella. Well, there you go. That seems like a good resource then. I might go in and look at it myself later. Thank you again, chat. Thank you, School of Game Audio. All right, I think I'm going to end it there. Yeah, hope people enjoyed that. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me if you would like to. I'm happy to chat or answer any questions. And yeah, have a nice evening, everyone.